right. We have the pleasure this morning of hearing Valerie Stephens. I got to hear her on Monday night, and it was just such a blessing. She is almost an empty nester. She has 2 boys in college and 1 son at home still. She's been married for 27 years to a wonderful, I didn't say the best, but my husband was a teacher.
Okay, good.
A wonderful public school teacher here in San Clemente. She put the best. Hey,
and then Leah was there.
She's a part-time counselor in Laguna Niguel, and she loves all things Bible and beach, so she lives in a great place. Going to a great church and living close to the beach. So she started working out her faith when she was age 9 years old. So I want to welcome Valerie as she leads us in our study this week, Charting Your Course.
Thank you. Okay. I want to be mobile, so I'm going to take that out. So, growing up in a small town, I dreaded a certain question. And inevitably it would happen every school year when you meet the new people or you have your new gathering of friends. There would be a question coming around the circle. And I would think, is there any way to get out of this? I'd think, can I run to the bathroom? Can I go to the locker? What do I do? And you could just sense my friends that knew me were getting giddy because they knew what was about to happen. And the question got to me. And the question was, what does your father do for a living? And I'd have to say the sentence, my father's a pastor. And then immediately this look of confusion and bewilderment and unable to categorize even what that meant as they stared at me in this prolonged way. And then finally this awkward silence would go by and then they'd say, oh, he's a priest. Every time that happened. I don't know why there was no Protestants in my town, I guess, but and I'd have to explain, no, I wouldn't be here if he was a priest, and we'd have to talk about Protestantism and Catholicism and all this. And then finally, the next thing would happen where another light bulb went on in their mind, and I could tell it had happened. I was labeled and put in a box. And from then on, I felt that message from them, which was, she's a goody good. And from then on, if I walked up to a circle of friends, if I was approaching anyone, I could hear the, here she comes. And if I was in a circle of girls talking, and inevitably, this is all, my whole life was public school, someone would swear, and immediately, this look of horror as they turned to me. And it was like, I was like the glowing face of Moses holding the 10 Commandments, And I would get this complete horrified apology like I was Father Valerie and we were in the confessional booth. It was just this bizarre upbringing of having been labeled the goody good, and I wore that G like a scarlet letter all year, that I was good. And I eventually, I think over time, just embraced that external label. And it became that, well, because of what my father does, where I am on Sundays and the potlucks and all the stuff that I went to and did, I was good, which made me think this is what being a Christian was. Well, over decades in time, does that external activity, religious belonging, do anything on the core of who I was? No. So that external life doesn't impact our core, our spirit, our will, and our heart, which is where God says we have to go there first. So over time, I found that my insides were garbage. And it wasn't until I got my Damascus moment where it was like, let there be light on your insides, that I was able to finally see what was going on inside of me, which was condemnation and judgment, wicked thoughts, gossip, judgmental. It was very ugly, not unlike when you're walking by the counter and you see your reflection in the mirror and you think you're okay, and then you flip the mirror. You ever done the flip with the magnification? And the magnification reveals something that was there all along, but you couldn't see it. And you see the pores and the age spots and the wrinkles or all the things above, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's real sight. That's real truth. That's not deception anymore. And I found myself flat on the floor, which was the right posture for the deception and the lack of humility and the lack of truly knowing who I was. And before God, that was an amazing experience to know that forgiveness feels like love. And confessing to him all the garbage on the inside was a beautiful experience because I began to know how much I was loved for the first time. And I started to think I needed to find, Confessions Anonymous because I wanted to just confess all the time. It was so amazing to have that feeling of forgiveness and love in my life. And you can see why I could relate to Paul, right? He's doing the external life. His heart and will and spirit, his core, as the Bible interchanges these words, was independent of God, and he was a self-promoter. Religious activity with self as the emphasis, not promoting God and not dependent on him. So I want to look at 3 examples from our text. I'm having trouble keeping this at the right level. Am I doing the whisper thing too much? No? Okay. Thank you. 3 men from our text. We're going to look at Saul, and I'm sorry if I go between Saul and Paul. I might do that a bunch of times. It's the same man. Saul, Ananias, and Stephen. And as I was mentioning, that self-absorbed, self-promoting life that Paul was living, the more that he lived it, the more really perverse he got. And the zeal, the Bible describes that zeal that he had is like a bubbling over of hot water. So it's kind of an out of control, venomous, some commentators call him a wild beast. When you think about that he was able, as he confessed, to beat women, to get them to confess, to be a part of horrific deaths like bludgeoning people with rocks. I mean, this is a life very far from the heart of God. And living it, as we've been learning on Sunday mornings, for the letter of the law, not the spirit of the law. His spirit is not connected to God's spirit. I like how the theologian describes this, Dr. Black. When we trust our lives to God's direction, we find the essence and substance of the lives we truly yearn for. When we try to make a life on our own to create an illusion that becomes a reality, our very attempts will sometimes slowly but most assuredly destroy us. The pride of self-idolatry begets ruthless tyrants. Doesn't that describe Saul? Ruthless tyrant. Love of God begets empowered servants. The trade is ours to make. Saul is a tyrant at this point, a Pharisee type A, right? Now, there were Pharisees during this time that were open to God's teaching, whose spirit was connected to God, whose eyes were being opened. We have examples of Nicodemus and other Pharisees who were coming to the Messiah. Saul was doubling down, right? And thinking that anyone against his thinking was against God, as if he himself is the representation of it. That's a lot of self-idolatry. I want you to look at, in Acts chapter 9, where we get the experience of Saul encountering God. And in Acts 9 is what your homework was. we think about, well, what happens when God shows up in Saul's life? And here we have it. A light from heaven suddenly shone around him. I'm in chapter 9, verse 3. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And think about Saul's response. Who are you, Lord? Now that word Lord is like being used for the word master. Obviously, he's going to give some respect to a light, a vision, a voice, right? But think of him saying, who are you? This is supposedly what his whole life has been about, is serving the person that he doesn't even know. Who are you, Lord? And it really brought to mind for me when Jesus talks about what it means to know him. And the verse in Matthew chapter 7, when the people that are religious are describing what their lives have been like, and that they are proclaiming that, yeah, we know you. We prophesize, we do miracles, we cast out demons. You could just see Paul in the same light saying, hey, I'm going over 100 miles for you. I'm doing all this for you. I'm memorizing the Torah, and I'm praying, I'm reading, I'm doing all this for you. And Jesus, in these words to the people that are coming to him, says, get away. I don't know you. I don't know you. I never knew you. Depart from me. Well, that should just be like smelling salts to us, right? Because the people that are described there, casting out demons, performing miracles, we would say, that's who I'm looking up to. Wow, they're doing it. They've got it. But Jesus is saying, no, I don't know you. Well, how does that make any sense when he's omniscient, right? He knows everyone. But the word know that he uses is ginosko. Can everyone say that with me? Ginosko. It's just kind of fun to say. Say it again. Ginosko, right? I love this Greek word because it explains everything about what Jesus is saying. He's saying, I don't gnosko you, which means we don't have an everyday, intimate, interactive, experiential knowledge of each other. Wow. So we're learning from this text that he says, unless you're dependent here on me, we're not gnoskoing life. We're not having a dependent, experiential, interactive, where you're a student and I'm the teacher. This is not gnosko. Depart from me. I don't know you. Same word that Mary uses when the angel tells her, you're going to bear the Messiah. You're going to be pregnant. You're going to have the Messiah. And she says, what? I don't gnosko any man. That same word is used for what is called sexual intimacy. So Mary is saying, I don't have an interactive, intimate experience with a man. I don't gnosko a man. Well, obviously she knew what men were, right? She knew Joseph. She knew who the men and female were. But she's giving that answer because it's not an intimate experience. And God is saying you have to start with your core, your heart, your will, your spirit, dependent on me as a student to experience and know me. Whole nother level of the word know from our English language. I could say I know my neighbor and I know my husband. Well, obviously, the word know needs some explanation, and the Greek does that for us. Now, when you think about not having this external part, what does it become? Eternal. So when we become dependent on God, we now are a promoter of God. when we change and say, my core will be dependent on you, now you're promoting God, and you're living in an interactive, intimate, conversational, everyday experiencing knowledge of God. And he won't settle for anything but that. And really the text is telling us doing religious activities is illegal to God without a relationship with him. There is a right way and a wrong way. There's a false way and a true way. There's fake and there's real. And I think, unfortunately, in our Christian culture, we've really taken some good truths, but kind of left everyone there, which is come as you are, just as you are. And then we almost leave it at you do you. This new saying, right? That is so far from the mind of heart of God. Yes, come as you are, just as you are, but now be dependent completely from your very core and be a learner and know me. Know me. Gnosko with me. It's not acceptable to God unless we are a disciple. And even our Bible translations have started to just use the word believer. I would just cross out believer and write disciple. That's truly what the Greek word would be. That you are a learner dependent on him, experiencing and knowing him. So, eternal life starts the minute we gnosko with God. Jesus describes this as well. He says, eternal life is to know the Father. And he uses the word gnosko. Eternal life is to know the Father. So our eternal life isn't something we're waiting for. Our eternal life starts the minute we begin this gnosko knowing with God. I like how Pierre Chardin puts it. He says, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. So to wrap your mind around that God is spirit, how else can we connect but with our spirit? How can we transform our thinking in that you're an unceasing spiritual being who needs to connect to the one to transform you to be ready for heaven? Even 1 Timothy, Paul says, I was persecuting believers and doing all that without gnosko. I did all this without knowing him. And I love Dallas Willard, what he says, and he describes this relationship with God. He says, the heart or will is spirit in human beings. It is the human spirit and the only thing in us that God will accept as the basis of our relationship to him. It is the spiritual plane of our natural existence, the place of truth before God, from where alone our whole lives can become eternal. The only thing God will accept as the basis of our relationship to him. Think about how beautiful that is, that he says, we're not going to do shallow. We're not going to do fake. I'm going to call out of you, out of love, the highest potential of who you are created to be. What does it mean to have a life that I don't get to just forge ahead and make it up? What would a life look like? C.S. Lewis describes it like this: give up yourself and you will find your real self. Lose your life and you will save it. Submit to death, death of your ambitions and favorite wishes every day, and death of your whole body in the end. Submit with every fiber of your being, and you will find eternal life. Keep back nothing. Nothing that you have not given away will ever be really yours. Nothing in you that has not died will ever be raised from the dead. Look for yourself, and you will find in the long run only hatred, loneliness, despair, rage, ruin, and decay. But look for Christ, and you will find him, and with him, everything else thrown in. The core has to align with truth. Passion and zeal does not change truth in reality. Truth is objective, right? We have to come how he says to come. So what is our next example, Ananias? Does he have kenosko with God? And we look at same chapter, chapter 9, where we've got an actual follower, not someone trying to do a formula. And what happens when God shows up in his life? And we're looking at verse 10, chapter 9. Now there was a believer in Damascus, so you could cross out believer and write disciple if you want, named Ananias. The Lord spoke to him in a vision, calling, Ananias. And don't you love that he only had to say his name once? With Saul, he's like, you know, when if you're parents, that the child you have to say the name the most is the most stubborn, right? And he just has to say his name once. And what does Ananias say? Yes, Lord. He doesn't say, who are you? Right? Yes, Lord. I know your voice. Just like Jesus saying, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And here's Ananias, who's got this dependency from his core on God, experiencing him and knowing his voice, and getting spectacular supernatural experiences because of that dependency. Amazing. He knows who God is. Yes, Lord. And I love the conversational part of his relationship with God, because he'll even say, I don't want to do that. And God, like a friend, says, well, yeah, and this is why. And they're not equals, but it's a friendship conversation. And what does Ananias get out of that dependency? He's getting to bring light to the darkness. He's turning someone from being blind to seeing, from the power of Satan to God, forgiveness of sins, right? Ananias is directly involved with the supernatural activity of God because he's kenosko with God, right? He knows him. The third example is Stephen. Now, Stephen is even more so gnosko. We're ending on the most gnosko one you could probably ever read about in the Bible is Stephen. In fact, his heart, will, and spirit are so connected to God, it's bursting through his body what's true on the inside. His cells can't even do anything but reflect the glory that's inside of this man. His face shines like an angel. He's able to deliver the most amazing address to people that hate him with boldness. He's able to pray when he's being hit with rocks. This is amazing supernatural strength to think about. In fact, when he's hit with rocks, you know what comes out of him? Agape love. He not only looks like an angel, he sounds like Jesus. That core has penetrated through his mind to the body, and his entire soul is on display right now. And guess what happens when you're all connected that way? You actually see reality. He actually could see truth. He saw that Jesus is there. He gives a prayer like Jesus over his enemies that so reflected Jesus' words of, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. Saul says, Lord, don't hold this against them. Who was one of the enemies standing there? Why do you think God isn't saying to Saul, get away, I don't know you, very well could be because of Stephen's prayer. Stephen's prayer is so mighty and powerful, like James says, that a righteous man's prayers are powerful and effective. Another translation says it has wonderful results. We're experiencing those wonderful results today. Stephen's prayer could be the very reason Saul says, I was given mercy. Imagine the powerful and effectiveness of Stephen's words. If this part of yourself, this heart, this will, the real spirit of you, if you have trouble even accessing it, if you have been living so exhausted and distracted that you're like, I don't even know if I can find it.